I am going to say a few words that Peter might have said, and then turn the microphone over to Michael Roosevelt. So Peter is a professor at Sacramento State and is someone who has dived deeply into the Anza expedition. And so I'm hoping he'll get here and be able to talk more about it, but I will touch on a couple of things that we had talked about his covering. First, of course, as others have said, this expedition was extremely important in the founding of California as we know it today. The colonists came from Sonora, Mexico to San Francisco, 1,600 miles, walking, riding horseback, and there were 240 of them with 1,000 livestock, which is cattle, mules, sheep. And it was a city that moved across Indian tribal lands. So we do know that there were about 75 tribes that the Anza expedition touched as they came. And these tribes reacted to this expedition, to this huge number of people, in a variety of ways. And I wanted to just read a few of the ways that they reacted. Back at on one of the national park tables, there's a book that is Alan Brown's book on the Font Diaries, and he has an extraordinary introduction to this book. And in that introduction, he described some of the reactions of the Indian tribes. Curiosity, negative gestures, displays of power, courtesy, quiet refusal, ceremonious hospitality, rapaciousness, edginess with precautions, and sometimes sheer panic. I think the panic had to do with their never having seen a man on a horse before, if you can imagine. The colonists themselves traveled over rivers and creeks and through winter desert and over mountains into what I like to think of as the Promised Land, which was Alta California. And 4 babies were born along the way. In 1776, Anza located the San Francisco Presidio and the location for Mission Dolores. And the next year, Lieutenant Joaquin Moraga helped to found Santa Clara Mission and the first city in California, San Jose. So Moraga was second in command to Anza, and we have him in our county. So we're very pleased to have Moragans represented through that. Today we are fortunate to have at least one panel and a panelist and maybe 2. And let me just say a few words about what Peter was going to touch on. And that had to do with what made the colonists that Anza brought unique. Now this was 1775, 1776, and there had been another expedition, the first one, they called it the Sacred Expedition, with soldiers and missionaries, the Puerto La Serra expedition. And that had been all men. And they came up from Baja California, they came via ship, and they began to found the first forts or presidios and the first missions. And of course, we all know about Father Serra and what a powerful personality he was. He was very supportive of bringing more people here, and particularly colonists and families.
because unfortunately, since this first expedition was all men, and some of them were young and a little rowdy, they abused Native American women. And Father Serra didn't say anything really sympathetic to the women, but he did say these soldiers were not showing that they could be good Catholics. That's a missionary perspective, right? And so we have the colonists coming, and it was quite an extraordinary expedition. Of the 240, there were about 100 children, and there were soldiers with their wives and their children and others who were recruited in Sonora. And so it was the women that made a difference in terms of the settlement. And as I said, 4 of them had babies along the way, and some other children were lost in childbirth. But they brought what you need for the beginnings of a civilization. They also, as they demonstrated throughout the expedition, said or expressed themselves in a little more independent way than Spanish women were expected to act. And they pushed the boundaries, and then when they came to California, they had the freedom to do things in a different way than women in New Spain were able to do. So I just want you to give a cheer for the women, okay? And then I'll tell one expedition story and let Michael talk. This had to do with a widow who was on the expedition. Her husband was a soldier and he had passed just before, and she talked her way into coming on the expedition with her 2 children without her husband. And she traveled the expedition, and the time we know about her was in late December at Anza, now today's Anza Borrego State Desert Park, because what happened was the expedition had divided into 3 groups of people and 1 of livestock, and they had gone through the Colorado desert in winter with sleet and snow, and everyone had managed to do that. And this was when everyone had reunion together. And Anza, ever the sympathetic commander, said, "Oh, time for us to have a party." Well, maybe they called it a fandango, but he did bring out the brandy. And Father Font, who was a little tighter personality, said, "Oh, you shouldn't do this. People will get drunk, and they won't honor the Virgin of Guadalupe." And Anza said, "It's time for a celebration." So they had a party, and they had a very good time. And the next morning, Font had said Mass, and then in his diary, he indicated there was a widow with the expedition who had sung bawdy songs. And people had not comported themselves as they should. And what he said in the diary was that instead of thanking God for our success across the desert, it seemed to me with this party, we were giving tribute to the devil. So you can see why Anza and Font, that's just a small sample of how they looked at things differently. So with that, and my story about Felicio Arbario, I would like to turn to Michael Roosevelt, who is a person with a great deal of interest in the diversity of the expedition as it came, and he is an author and a historian. And so I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you. I do have some slides, and I'm delighted to be here with you. And I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of someone who was important to all of us, Betty Soskin Reed, because her role in making, I think, a national and statewide focus on the work that you do in our parks is such a critical, and we need her in this moment now when parks are being challenged and the stories that are being told are being challenged. And so I wanted to call on her as an ancestor to guide us as we move forward in the work that we do in terms of acknowledging and educating. I had the fortunate position of interviewing her a number of years ago, and to her humility, the ability to communicate. But what was most startling about her was the fullness of her life and the fullness of her life lived. And I wanted to acknowledge that before I begin my remarks as we begin to talk more in depth about I'm going to call it the African Latino. And the reason I'm going to do that because Afro doesn't really connect up more deeply than to say the African. And so I'm going to say African Latino versus Afro Latino. So pardon me for doing that. Slides.
So we're gonna see, ask you. You have your slides over there.
Okay.
We'll put them here. We're gonna turn the lights down.
Okay.
Once the lights are down, we're gonna put it over here. You let us know, up or down, if it is affecting you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go for it. So as we go with the slides, I wanted to acknowledge the fact that all of us are living in a world that is smaller and smaller. It is not getting larger, it is getting smaller and smaller. So I wanted to start with a story. 2 years ago, I was standing in Seville, Spain. In Seville, Spain, standing at what's called Gibraltar, or the Rock of Gibraltar. And I was standing there and looking toward Morocco. Because from Gibraltar, you can actually, just a short boat ride away is Gibraltar. And so I got to the highest point, not on the rock, but I got to the highest point in Seville. And I was trying to look over to see if I could see Morocco, which is Africa. And oftentimes in our maps, we cut off Morocco from Africa. And that's colonial design. The idea that Africa and Egypt and the rest of Africa and Morocco are not connected. They are one and the same. It's one continent. But what I was trying to explore here is the reason Gibraltar is named Gibraltar. It is named after the Moors. The Moors were a group of Africans who left Africa. And this is well prior to De Anza. And I think it's important to understand that because the idea that the De Anza expedition was the first, Africans had come to the Americas, had come to Europe, had come to other parts of the world long before. And I wanted to make that point because I think it's important to understand that when we talk about history, that wasn't the first expedition. And when we talk about the Moors in Spain, it's important to talk about the name of that rock. It was named after an African person, Gibraltar. So I wanted to point that out. I think it's also important to look at that rock. It's not just a rock, it is it looks like Yosemite, the face of Yosemite. But I wanted to point out the fact that this African connection. And who were the Moors? The Moors were a black people. And the name Moor is black. If you translate the word Moor or Moreno, these are the origins of the word of that term. So I wanted to highlight the fact that when we talk about the expedition, the people that came over were connected their African heritage was connected to this long history of expeditions. The Moors very likely look like this. We call them Berbers today. And the Berbers are largely Muslim in practice, but they have their own practices and unique practices. But this is how a Berber might have looked, a Moor might have looked during that time period. And so these Moors came over, and we know that the Moors were prominent in the 8th through the 12th centuries, 10th or 12th century. So the Moors were a very prominent presence and an important group to understand in the history of what we're going to talk about. So you see, I say African Latino. And I want to do that intentionally, as I said before, because often we overlook the fact that there were African descended people who came here and came here in a migration. I want to also mention to you a few books. One book that I would highly recommend that you look at, if you want to know about the history prior, is a book called The Moors in Spain. Last name is Poole. Another book I'd recommend was the Unexpected Faces in America by Vuonwatanu. And his book looks at these sculptures in ancient times that prior to the Moors, there were also other Africans who came to the Americas. And then I wanted to highlight a scholar and a friend of mine, he's now passed, name is Dr. Ivan van Sertima, and he wrote a book called They Came Before Columbus. And it's a classic book. I'd highly recommend that you get that book and take a look at it. But we want to recommend that you take a look at the diversity in this room. We have diversity that may not be apparent, but there's a lot of diversity in this room. In the expedition, there was a tremendous amount of diversity, a racial diversity. And I think that's important to not lose that. In the times that we live in today, we want to diminish the importance of diversity when we should be highlighting the point of diversity. And I'm so glad we're here today really highlighting the importance of diversity in our history. Because if we understand history, we understand diversity, then I think it unifies us. It brings us more together. We highlighted these African descended families, and there were many African descended families. And when I say African descended families, in today's look, if we look at the different ethnic and racial breakdown of the group, they may not appear phenotypically to look like they're African descent. This is important because I want you to look at Pope Leo. Pope Leo may not look like he's African descended, but he is African descended. He has family, he is African American, but by phenotypically, he may not appear to look so. You follow what I'm saying? That's important that when we look at photos and pictures of that era, because we've been colonialized to how we think about race, how we've been conceptualizing race, that we don't think of the nuance and the complexity of ethnicity, of how we all look. So I think that's really important to understand. The early Californians had many, many roles: soldiers, ranchers, farmers, artisans. And this is important because they were able to own property, to own land. How many have a house in this area, own a home? How many own a home on 300,000 acres? Because that is, in some cases, what we're talking about. These families had massive land wealth. And that land wealth equates to power. And power allows you to be able to grow and benefit your family, your community, and society. And so, and many of the people who came here actually founded cities that we don't know today. So cities that we take for granted were founded by people of African descended people. Imagine if people in Marin knew about Tiburon. You know, imagine if folks understood the connection between the place that they live and its history, and the people who helped found it. So it's important to understand that. We think about Los Angeles as this multiracial place. It is a multiracial place, but there were people who founded that area of Los Angeles that we know as Los Angeles today were of African descended people, and a multiracial group of African descended people. LA today is multiracial and it is very diverse, but I think it's important to understand that at a time when people were leaving one place and coming to another place, they brought with them their culture, they brought with them their religion, they brought with them practices that made that place even more diverse. I would like to say that the people who came in the Anza expedition, who were of African descendants, were on the Great Black Migration. It was another great black migration. We would see one later in this United States in the 1940s and the 1950s when African Americans left the South to come north. They left there for more opportunities. They left there to escape oppression. They left there to help their families succeed, to leave an oppressive situation. And so we think about the folks who are African descendant, there was a reason why they left, right? And where they came to was for more opportunity. I think we all can resonate that. How many of you have an immigrant experience in your life? Family were immigrants. So you understand the idea of moving and migration and coming to a different place. And so I wanted to highlight that for us so that we are all connected in this history. Here is some of the diversity that we do know, and there were terms that were used that we may not always appreciate, like a mulatto, mestizo. These are words that we use that may be offensive to us, but some related to two people marrying and becoming one. So if you have in the back, one time it was black and white, you were considered to be mulatto, okay? But then it depends on your percentage of what you were that made you more one than the other. In other words, so you could be mulatto, but you might be mulatto in a small degree than somebody who says one parent is white, one person was black, for example. But over time, let's say that diminishes because you outmarry, and then you lose that percentage. So there was an idea back in the day of a certain racial mixture. If you had too much of that, you would be black. If you had too little of that, you would be white. And if you lost that, you'd be black again. There's this whole idea. And so the majority had African ancestry. And it's important to understand that the ancestry mixed with Native people, it mixed with other ethnic and racial group and indigenous populations here. So let me mention that the diversity is really important when we talk about the movement of people and what those people brought with them. Wouldn't it be nice that we had learned in school that there was a black governor of California? Wouldn't that have been a piece of history that would have changed how some people looked at history if you had known that Pico Pico, that even though we have this history in textbooks only recently, and today, as we know, textbooks are being challenged, and that this history is so important. So I'm going to commend all of you to keep your libraries. Do not give away your books, because we're witnessing a point now where this Pico Pico history would be considered to be DEI. And so I think it's important to not forget the importance of the families that owned land, like Juana Briones and the family that owned a huge amount of land in California. And the importance of women, as you were talking about women were critical, important. Women as mothers, women as daughters, women as, co-founders and co-leaders in their families. And I think it's really important to understand the importance of role of women in the history of California. When I took history in school, I can't remember in high school there was a mention of any women. So I would think that half the world was missing. I didn't know that women played such a prominent role in history, and in California history, they played a critical role in what we look at today as the Afro or African Latino history and culture. Let me pause and see if there's any questions, because I want to engage you too, because I can talk all day, but that's not the intention of this place. It's really to engage you. So let me pause. Questions, please. And don't be shy. Yes.
I'm just curious, when you talk about the Moors, or this black coming to America, how did they get here? What did they do?
So there were two, it's important to know there were many movements of Africans from the African continent to the Americas. But the Moors actually came into Spain. And they actually, I don't want to say ruled Spain, but they actually ruled Spain. I'm trying to be careful with my language. And so they were in Spain. So I was talking about that migration. And what I'm trying to indicate that when you get to Spain and Spaniards, they were already largely mixed with Moors. And so that's the connection that, and thank you for clarifying that. That's the connection. Thank you for so much. Yes.
Okay, well, you got, of course, you got two, they're so close together. So
Yes.
obviously, that's completely legitimate. Obviously, you can't debunk that history at all.
Right.
So, but when did they actually migrate to? Did they migrate to the Indies, or how did they get here?
So the Moors, it was very easy. If you go back to that little map I showed.
Yeah.
If you took you could actually in a clear, you could actually see it. So by boat.
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah, of course you can see it by boat and
Yeah.
everything. But of course they were together. They
Yeah.
were intermixed with the Spanish culture.
Yes.
So of course they were going on expeditions with them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So while I'm trying to figure out what was the exact date, because the Spanish were very meticulous
Yes.
in their documentation.
So we're talking about the 8th century.
8th century.
Yeah, we're talking about approximately. So we're talking about the 8th century to the 10th, around that period.
Okay.
Was this migration, and then there was a point in when the Moors were kicked out of Spain.
Okay. Do you have
And-
archival evidence on that?
Oh, not only archival evidence, the documentation is pristine in that. So I'm going to give you a reference that will help you really get the clear history. And that book is, and you can find it, it's somewhat rare. It's called The Golden Age of the Moors. And it was written by Dr. Ivan van Sertima. And it has edited a series of articles by scholars from around the world, but primarily United States-based scholars. And what it shows is that period in which they came and what they brought with them, the Moors, and what was left that's considered to be Spanish, but actually has African origins. Even to the point of architecture, and even to the point where we also know, you may not know this, but many of the saints that we know today, like the Virgin Guadalupe, is a black woman. Many of the sacred Spanish iconic sort of images of Virgin Mary is a black woman. And so, I mean, you know that, don't you? Yeah. Yeah, see, this is a smart group. All right. More questions, please.
This is a smart group. Thanks. This is a smart group, so I'm pretty sure everybody knows, but I'll let you answer. The last year of the Reconquista, do you know what year that was?
No, I don't. You tell me.
It's 1492.
There you go.
1492.
That was right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So, right, yeah, so the Moors and the Spanish were together.
Mm-hmm.
They were the ones that didn't go back because they were Catholic, and so they came to Mexico. They came to New Spain.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Okay. I see a question back there somewhere.
Who would you like to?
How are we doing time?
I think we're doing fine. I think 2 we need to talk about how they came to New Spain.
Yeah, okay.
Hi. I'd like to ask if what you know about Juana Briones as a healer. I'm from Palo Alto, where we have an elementary school named after her, so the younger kids certainly learn about her. And they learn that she was a landowner, a rancher, and a businesswoman running a dairy, giving Cow Hollow its name in San Francisco. But she was also known as a healer because her mother, who was a child on the Anza expedition, and her grandmother, who was an adult on the Anza expedition, they were well-known healers who used, and midwives, which is why there's so few deaths on that trail, with all those babies being born. But she grew up with a healing tradition that included, of course, African, also indigenous people in northern Mexico, and the Spanish culture. So that's why she was able to buy basically all of Palo Alto and most of Los Altos Hills, because she earned money with her dairy and also people giving her money as a healer, even though she was totally illiterate. So that's a very important story that's not in many history textbooks, that a lot of these women had this healing tradition with herbs and midwifery because that was considered women's work. And so it wasn't documented by the men. It was just, oh, the women take care of any cuts and bruises and difficult pregnancies.
Thank you. And I think that's important to highlight this history of what people brought with them, and and it wasn't magic, it was healing. It was passed on from one person to another in a traditional way. And so I thank you for pointing that out. I only read that one snippet that she was a healer. I didn't know the depth that you have and how you described it. So thank you so much for making that contribution. I really appreciate it. Yes.
Hello. I'm curious if you could share, or if you know, how the Moors or the African Latinos, as you say, that traveled over and encountered indigenous peoples, what was their relationship like with indigenous peoples here? Were they similar to the Spaniards and stuff like that, or did they have a different opinion, as their skin, was similar to the natives, indigenous people?
So let me be clear. So the Moors in Spain, not the Moors in California. So I'm talking about what came through was the Moors were in Spain, right? They came to Spain, and then the people who finally came from Spain to what we call the Americas very likely had Moorish blood. You follow me? So I'm not saying that they had a relationship with them, but that they had Moorish within them. They all had black heritage, black genetic pool within them. So I want to make that real clear. I'm not talking about that leap, but I'm talking about the fact that they were already, the people who came here from Spain were already black. They already had African blood within them. Does that make sense? I just want to make sure, I want to clarify that. I don't want to confuse people by saying one with other. Yes. Yes.
Hello? Okay. Just a comment question, actually more a question, but to put it in perspective, I have the book, They Came Before Columbus.
Yes.
I have a general exposure, but very little. I'm skeptical, but I'm not saying I disagree. I'm
Yes.
skeptical until I read more.
Yes.
But with that said, what I do know a little bit about that's conducive to part of what you're saying is the Moors occupied Spain and ruled Spain area for many, many years. Maybe you can comment on that, but what I was amazed to find out was that they were advanced scientists, advanced mathematics, and all of that got suppressed later. Their advancement in the sciences was way ahead of time, and that may lend some reason why they may have been here long before Columbus. I have no idea. I think your point is that when the Spanish come over, they've got black blood. But you've also made the point, and people have been questioning you on it, that Moors in some form were here as far as 800. I'm skeptical, but I'm not challenging it. I'm just saying the Moors were a very advanced society.
I want to say that a good scientist has to be skeptical. If you take anything that someone says at face value, then that's not applying your own analysis. And so I would encourage you to do just that, right? Is to really engage in that, what a deep study of these topics. And one of the things I will note about the African folks who were Moors, the Spaniards wrote about them. You know, they didn't deny that they were there. History book has written a tremendous amount of books. Like I said, Stanley Poole's book, The Moors in Spain, is an old book. So there's documentation. It's just that the critiques that are being given to them often have what I call a Eurocentric focus. It comes from a Eurocentric critical eye, and these people are coming in with a different perspective on it. So, yeah, I saw a question back there somewhere, and I know I need to keep it moving.
So I just wanted to say that as far as the big picture is concerned, could you, I have my question written down here, so give me a second. So we are aware of the ANZA party was incredibly diverse, including many Afro, Latino, and multi-ethnic families. How can highlighting this diversity help modern students from various backgrounds see themselves in California colonial history?
Well, I think part of learning this history is corrective. It is correcting what has not been told and reframing it in a way that can, I don't want to say empower people, but they can imagine themselves as being part of history. So, you know what I mean? So that if you don't see this history, then you don't see yourselves as being a part of something. And so I think the project of schools, and this is also a very important thing, that teachers have to be able to teach this in a way that engages young people. So you just can't teach it in a linear dates, personalities, and people. You have to actually have the young people actually become those people, act out, you know, do plays, use hip hop, use music, use a way to engage the learner in a way that would be, I think, inspiring. But this doesn't mean just primary school. This means high school, college, and us elders. We also can benefit from this education. So I'm going beyond just the schoolhouse, but into the real house, which is what we all need to be expanding our knowledge of these, this part of our history. Yes.
I'm curious how you draw the line between the fact of the initial Moors, but then later on there was slavery in Mexico. They brought African slaves. Mm-hmm. But they were also enlightened in a sense that they were freed long before ANZA came to California, and they were fully integrated into Spanish society. Mm-hmm. And beyond the class, it seemed like the true measure of differentiation was education versus class. As you pointed out here, that many of the mixed races were very successful here in California.
I want to say something. I want to be very, very cautious here when I say this, that what was enslavement during a certain period of history looked different than chattel slavery in the United States. That there was this idea of mobility, and that you could move up in station. You could marry someone of a different race. So there was a different conceptualization of what it was. And I think that is something that I think we often forget in history, is that we look at it through chattel slavery in the United States and not through the form of enslavement that were in other parts of the world. And we see in Mexico today, places like Veracruz, a large, still African population. There are parts of Mexico that there are people who look just like me, who are living in Mexico, who are speaking living and speaking fluent Spanish and all that. They are Mexican, but they live in their own community. So yes, but I want to be very cautious. It's different. It's not the same. If that makes sense. Okay. I want to be mindful of time, but I also want to make sure I engage you. Is this okay for me to have conversation? Okay, good. Yes.
Dr. Goff, I have a book my uncle gave me. I think it's called Los Californios.
Mm-hmm.
And I read in there that the first governor of California was African American, or Afro-Latino, as you say. But I don't remember the name now. But it wasn't Pio Pico.
Pico Pico.
But this says the last Mexican governor of California. And I thought I read he was the first governor of California.
One of the earliest, yeah.
I believe once
Bob.
the United States
Became California.
became California.
California.
I'm pretty sure once the United States became California that Pio Pico
Yes.
remained the governor. He was like during the transition. So he was the last Mexican governor of California. I guess you could say he's the first American governor of California.
We'll call him a brother. Yeah, please.
I want to ask Beverly a question. So Beverly, you've spent your career documenting local history in a state that is constantly reinventing itself and looking toward the future. How do you convince younger generations that preserving physical historical sites is vital to our identity?
This week. I saw your mic there, but that was it.
Well, I have no answer to that. But I do think that when we tell the stories that link our histories, we need to be very clear about all of the human beings who were part of that and what different people brought to it. Not only racial, but the role of women, which is so often not mentioned. So thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, Michael. We appreciate
Thank you.
it very much. Let's give a hand for him.
And for those of you who don't have a copy, I recommend Discovering Early California. If you don't have a copy of this is an amazing overview of history. So it's back there, so please grab your copy. I think it's worthwhile looking into. And if you want to come up and see some of the books I have, feel free to walk up. I'm not even charging for you to look at them. You can actually go look at them. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, man. I love conversations like this. I don't know about you, but I'm a big fan of these conversations. Thank you so much, Beverly. Thank you so much, Michael. Clap it up, make some noise for them one more time. That's right.